Welcome, seekers of truth, to another profound journey into our ancient and mysterious past. Many believe that perfect faith acts as an absolute shield against all worldly suffering and pain. They think divine grace guarantees a life entirely free from agonizing trials and deep sorrow. But the ancient ashes of Uz hold a terrifying truth about a righteous man broken by God. Today we witness Job's brutal test of forgiveness and the cruel beauty of his restoration. Following the terrifying voice from the whirlwind, an eerie silence fell upon the barren wasteland. Job sat alone among the cold gray ashes, his fragile body trembling wildly in the bitter wind. Ancient records show his severe physical pain remained, despite his profound spiritual awakening. The dreadful mark still covered his pale flesh, and his great earthly fortune was completely wiped away. At a distance stood his three companions, the very men who had crushed his spirit with cruel judgment. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar watched him in absolute silence, burdened by an overwhelming guilt. Their dark cloaks fluttered in the dusty wind as they realized the terrifying weight of their deep sin. For weeks, they relentlessly accused the broken patriarch, pouring burning salt upon his open wounds. Job stared at the barren earth, his fragile mind torn between newfound divine peace and brutal reality. The majesty of the Lord had humbled him, yet his fragile human heart still bled from the betrayal. Could you ever find the strength to forgive those who coldly turned away when you were completely destroyed? This inner conflict formed a mental battlefield far more brutal than any tragic war of swords and shields. The dying patriarch closed his weeping eyes, desperately searching for a tiny trace of sweet divine mercy. Every shallow breath he took brought a fresh wave of agony across his severely decaying physical form. Scholars note this deep suffering was meant to test the absolute limits of fragile human endurance. His rich community had abandoned him, leaving only the howling desert winds as his loyal friends. The sky remained overcast, mirroring the profound desolation firmly rooted inside his exhausted soul. He possessed no royal armies to fight this battle, only a shattered mind and a dangerously weak pulse. A single tear rolled down his dirty cheek, washing away a tiny patch of the gray ash covering his face. A lonely raven called out mournfully, amplifying the terrifying emptiness of the dead wasteland. His three friends dared not approach him, held back by an invisible barrier of deep shame and blinding terror. They finally realized that their self-righteous theology had completely failed them in the presence of God. The book of Job shows that human logic often crumbles when faced with the raw, chaotic power of the divine. A bitter wind swept through the camp, tearing away the remaining pieces of Job's tattered cloth garments. He wrapped his arms tightly around his frail chest, shivering violently as the temperature began to drop. Every physical sign pointed to a tragic end, a miserable fate for the greatest man of the entire East. But deep within his bruised ribs, a tiny flicker of unwavering devotion still stubbornly burned bright. He slowly raised his dirt-covered head, peering into the ominous dark clouds gathering above the mountains. The painful silence was finally broken, not by wind, but by the thunderous, majestic voice of the Creator. The earth trembled beneath their weary feet as the heavens opened once more to deliver a harsh judgment. God's anger did not burn against the suffering man, but furiously targeted the three arrogant companions. The Almighty voice declared that they had not spoken the holy truth about him. Unlike his faithful servant Job, Eliphaz fell violently to his shaking knees, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming terror of the Lord. Bildad and Zophar pressed their faces into the muddy ground, weeping loudly as divine wrath heavily loomed. The Almighty commanded them to quickly gather 7 strong bulls and 7 perfect rams for a burnt offering. But a dreadful condition was securely attached to this holy sacrifice, creating a massive mental burden. God explicitly declared that their desperate prayers would not be heard unless Job himself interceded for them. Job slowly rose from the ashes, his battered body shaking, leaning heavily against the dark, crumbling stone wall. The same men who had mercilessly destroyed his character now pathetically begged for his divine mercy. Historians emphasize that this was the most brutal test of all, representing a true sacrifice of the ego. Would he choose the comfortable path of bitter revenge, letting them suffer the devastating wrath of God? Or would he embrace the agonizing pain of absolute forgiveness, blessing the ones who had deeply cursed him? The tense silence stretched for miles across the windy desert as the broken patriarch stared at his abusers. He remembered their harsh, condemning words, accusing him of terrible secret sins to justify his suffering. Their cruel arrogance had completely shattered his fragile heart when he desperately needed a loyal friend. The 3 terrified elders brought the large animals forward, their hands trembling violently on the rough ropes. They slowly built a massive stone altar right in the middle of the desolate and entirely ruined landscape. Every single heavy stone they lifted felt like the crushing weight of their own monumental historical guilt. Job limped painfully toward the massive altar, his wounded feet leaving tragic marks upon the cold soil. The dark gray smoke of the burnt offering began to slowly rise, twisting and turning into the turbulent sky. Eliphaz looked up at Job with pathetic, tear-filled eyes, silently begging for the patriarch's holy intercession. The tension was thick enough to cut with a bronze knife, as the fate of 3 men rested in Job's scarred hands. At this precise moment, ancient history recorded its most beautiful and truly terrifying triumph. Job slowly lifted his battered face toward the heavens, feeling the sharp sting of the cold wind against his sores. He took a very deep, shaking breath, preparing to completely release the heavy poison of his justified anger. This powerful act proves that true spiritual elevation requires the complete destruction of the prideful ego. He looked down at the 3 trembling old men, realizing that they too were merely fragile dust before the Lord. Their grand theological arguments meant absolutely nothing. All that remained was the urgent need for raw grace. He raised his deeply scarred and wounded hands over the burning altar, surrendering his profound wrath. The quiet desert held its breath, witnessing an incredible mental victory that would echo through eternity. As Job's cracked lips finally parted, a profound prayer of complete forgiveness poured out into the howling wind. He did not ask for his wealth back, nor did he selfishly demand the immediate healing of his painful skin. Instead, he poured his entire remaining spiritual energy into blessing the men who had deeply cursed his name. The moment his genuine words of pardon left his tongue, an invisible, heavy chain of deep agony shattered. Suddenly, the dark storm clouds above the altar violently cracked open, revealing a blinding beam of pure gold. Majestic God rays pierced through the atmospheric gloom, entirely bathing the broken patriarch in divine warmth. The book of Job describes this exact moment as the great turning point, where grace entirely conquered judgment. As the celestial light finally touched his withered skin, an incredible physical miracle rapidly began. The tragic marks of deep physical decay upon his fragile form instantly began to smoothly fade. Deep, terrible gashes knitted back together, replaced by healthy bronze flesh, that strongly radiated vibrant life. Yet crucially, the divine healing did not simply erase the traumatic past, as if it had never occurred. Subtle white scars firmly remained permanently etched onto his arms and chest, a testament to his great survival. He stood completely transformed, radiating a serene majesty that far surpassed his previous earthly glory. The three friends, still pressing their tearful faces into the dirt, felt the oppressive weight lift from their souls. They wept openly, not from terrible fear of punishment, but out of pure gratitude for his unearned mercy. Job gently lowered his scarred hands, staring at the thick smoke rising peacefully into the now clear blue sky. The barren wasteland around the holy altar began to subtly change as vibrant green shoots pushed through the ash. A gentle, warm breeze swept across the valley, carrying the sweet scent of blooming flowers and rushing water. The absolute reversal of his tragic fortunes had officially commenced, guided by the generous hand of the Lord. Would you remain faithful if your ultimate reward was nothing but scars and a terrifying memory of pain? Job's incredible story challenges the core foundation of how humanity views divine transactional blessings. He did not forgive to get rich. He forgave because he had finally seen the overwhelming majesty of God. The ancient texts record that the Lord restored his massive fortunes, giving him precisely double what he lost. Thousands of healthy sheep, camels, and strong oxen began to miraculously pour into the vibrant green valley. The loud sound of bleating flocks completely replaced the miserable, agonizing silence of the ruined graveyard. His brothers, sisters, and former acquaintances returned, bringing generous gifts of silver and bright gold rings. They sat together and broke bread in his magnificent new tent, warmly comforting him over the past disaster. However, the immense material wealth was merely a shadow of his beautiful psychological resurrection. Job's deep faith had been brutally forged in the hottest furnace of unimaginable human suffering. He had looked directly into the terrifying abyss of despair and emerged with a pure heart of solid gold. Years peacefully passed, and the prosperous land of Uz flourished under the wise guidance of the healed patriarch. He was blessed with 7 new brave sons and 3 beautiful daughters, bringing joyful laughter back to his tent. Yet historical scholars remind us that these precious new children did not simply replace the ones he lost. The deep grief of a loving father remained buried within, gracefully woven into his profound earthly wisdom. Job often stood on the high green hills at golden sunrise, silently tracing the faded scars etched upon his arms. He knew that his miraculous healing did not erase the traumatic memories of his deep loss. True faith never guarantees a comfortable life completely shielded from dark tragedies. The fierce suffering he endured became a permanent testament to his loyal spirit. The Holy Scriptures tell us he lived 140 years after this brutal ordeal. He joyfully saw his children and their descendants flourish under the 4th generation. But the profound philosophical question of human suffering remains etched in our minds. If God is perfectly just and powerful, why do innocent people endure such great pain? The Book of Job boldly shatters the simplistic idea of transactional divine blessings. We do not serve the Creator merely to receive comfortable rewards or avoid punishments. We follow Him because His majestic wisdom surpasses our limited human understanding. When the dark storms violently rage and tear apart everything you hold incredibly dear, the ultimate victory is found in remaining securely anchored to the solid rock of faith. Job proved that a completely broken man could still choose to offer a genuine blessing.
And your hearts be filled with peace.
His permanently scarred hands lifting toward the heavens became the ultimate symbol of grace. As the sun sets on the land of Uz, we bid a respectful farewell to this legendary man. His incredible journey through the deepest darkness has forever changed our biblical history. Yet the powerful echoes of his profound spiritual struggle continue to loudly resonate. Now, the ancient narrative grandly shifts from the dusty desert to a majestic royal court. Leaving the fierce whirlwind behind, we enter a beautiful new era of profound poetic songs. Imagine a powerful warrior king, completely surrounded by his most dangerous and deadly foes. This mighty ruler possesses massive conquering armies, yet his soul desperately seeks true rest. How can a leader find deep inner peace when treacherous enemies plot right outside his gates? He looks away from his blood-stained iron swords and finds immense comfort in a humble shepherd's rod. The beloved Book of Psalms holds the ultimate divine secret to navigating the darkest valleys. We will unlock the glorious mysteries of Psalm 23 in our next epic episode. Prepare your hearts to walk through the terrifying valley of the shadow of death without any fear. Join us as King David brilliantly reveals the unparalleled protective power of the Good Shepherd. Job's permanent scars remind us that true healing does not always mean erasing our deep, painful past. Could you ever forgive the close friends who betrayed you? Share your profound thoughts in the comments below. If this epic journey moved your soul, please hit that like button, share the video, and subscribe right now.